So we all have those situations in World of Tanks where you come up against a tank that you don't quite know how to deal with, and I guess this video is going to try and teach you how to actually overcome those scenarios, how you can deal with tier 10 heavy tanks within World of Tanks. And of course we're going to look at all of the weak spots and the kind of areas you want to be focusing on when you play the game, and what kind of penetration values, how you can use your rounds to the best of your ability and be able to deal with tanks like this tank, the Maus, of course, the German tier 10 heavy tank. There are a few weak points that we can go through. The key ones being on the live model, well, you can see exactly how the armour kind of works. Well, you have this big lower plate, which of course needs 240mm of effective penetration to be able to go through it, at least with a decent chance. Of course, APCR rounds will make this basically terrible. You're going to be able to go through it with almost every single tier 8 if you're firing premium rounds at the lower plate and it's not angled. Of course, if the tank angles like this, you're going to have a little bit more of a problem with your tier 8 tanks that are going to be able to come up against this, but if you're in TDs and stuff, you'll be able to pen it. And of course, probably the biggest weak point of the Maus is of course this turret. When you come up against this thing, for the most part, you can angle the hull armour, which means that, you know, lower tiers aren't going to be able to do much. But of course, angling the turret is extremely difficult to be able to actually pull off bounces. Of course, this is kind of the angle you want to be keeping it at, making the effective armour of your tank about 330mm. But of course, that means that if they fire, often you don't get to actually put a shot back at them. So yeah, you might have bounced a shot, but that does mean that you're going to have to turn, aim at them and put damage back onto them. But of course, this is the area you want to be focusing on, the cheeks of the Maus. Now, how does that look on the actual model? If we have a look at the visual model, well, you want to aim for the flattest part. That's because it's rounded, and of course if you're above, it's going to be less rounded, and it changes dependent on the angle. So of course you can see as you get lower, you're going to be aiming at the lower part of the cheeks, and as you get higher, you want to be aiming at the higher part of the cheeks. And of course, if you're above it, you just want to shoot down onto the top of the tank because it's awful. But yeah, there we go. There's kind of the frontal weak points of the Maus. Of course, the side armor, you want to be aiming at the top bit. Don't aim for the lower bit where there's loads and loads of tracks. Aim for this side bit. And of course, if you get the side of the turret, that's where you want to be going as well. If you get around the rear, don't fire HE. The Maus doesn't have that low armor, at least for the most part. And of course, the back of the turret. If you are going to aim at any point, you want to be aiming at the back of the Maus. Don't aim for this lower plate because it's not really. It's actually probably more likely to bounce, because if the armor angle is slightly changed, yeah, you can get some weird bouncy angles from the back of the Maus. So yeah, aim at the top bit, or additionally just the back of the turret. But there we go, that is the Maus. We'll move on to another tank right here in the E100. Of course, this is another one of the classic German tier 10 heavy tanks. We'll go through every single one of them, show off the weak points. On the E100, where are you going to be aiming? Well, if we load the heat round, you want to be aiming at the lower plate, or additionally you can actually put rounds straight through the cheeks of the E100 if you've got a super high penetration. Things above 320mm will mean that basically the front armor of the E100 just becomes negligible. If it's hold down and you can't hit the lower plate, then of course aim at the cheeks of the tank, and if you're above them from like a hill or something, then the armor or effective armor of the tank becomes worse. And so actually, you know, it's very easy to go through the upper bit of the turret, so that kind of becomes irrelevant. And of course, there you go, the lower plate. Side armor, obviously aim at the side of the turret if you get the side of it, especially if you're loading heat. But of course, if you've got things like AP, then maybe you want to aim at the side of the turret still. Yeah, and of course the back of the tank, you just want to be aiming at the back of the turret if possible, or additionally just aim at the back of the hull. You're not really going to bounce at all, and that'll be the same with every single tank. If you do really want to actually pull off some, if you're in a tier 8 or something, and you do get a shot at this kind of area at the top of the tank, it's this bar, you can actually pen it and you can deal damage, which means that you're going to have a nicer time when you're coming up against the E100 if you can't actually get a shot at its lower plate, which is obviously the easier target. And if you've got 230mm plus, you'll be able to go through this with ease, and trust me, you can go through this with tier 8s easily, especially if you're loading premium ammunition. As far as another one, we have the Panzer Kpfw 7. Of course, this is a weird one. It's kind of got that weird kind of model, not very similar to any tank within the game, to be honest with you. Of course, this is what it looks like normally. Where you want to be aiming is actually this part here, this kind of sidebar. You see the side of the turret, there we go. You can see that it kind of pokes out and you actually get this effective armour of much lower than anywhere else. Even the lower plate of the Panzer 7, you basically have this awful kind of side bit. Now if we look at the live model, you'll see it here. It's this green bulbous bit here, and if we swap back to the visual, you'll see it. It's this area here on the tank. So if he's trying to side scrape, if it's trying to aim at you like this, coming round a corner, then you can put rounds straight away into this bit, pull back around the corner, and the Panzer 7 pretty much becomes useless. Definitely the armour model doesn't really work, to be honest, and so when you actually really look at the tank, of course you can try and hit the cupola, but it is very slim, and if you're lower than it, which you're probably going to be if you're in a medium or a light tank, you probably won't even be able to hit the cupola, but just because it's so high, but it is there as a choice. As far as the frontal armour, if you've got super high penetration, you'll be able to go through the lower plate if possible. If you've got 265mm of effective armour to 270, basically this area is for those of you with your premium ammunition at tier 10. I wouldn't recommend if you're a tier 8 to try and shoot this bit. You want to be going for this area here, which is about 200mm, and of course the side of the turret is fairly weak if it starts to angle at all in this kind of direction here, but of course if it then aims towards you, you don't really want to be aiming at the Panzer 7. Yes, you can hit the cheeks of the Panzer 7 if you actually aim properly and you get the RNG going in your favour, but if you don't, you are going to bounce because the mantlet is just tons of spaced armour along with a thick 200mm of actual armour behind it. And of course you'll get an auto ricochet if you miss, but there you go, there is a slim kind of area either side, and of course the turret cupola is going to be another area that you'll look at. This kind of port here is actually just a viewport, it's not actually armour, so don't go aiming at this area here, it won't actually bounce anything. Of course, side of the armour, you want to be aiming at the actual hull of the tank. Turret is kind of going to be one of those things that if, you know, they're wiggling, you may bounce, but of course the side armour, you're not going to bounce unless you actually hit the tracks with heat ammunition, but that's going to be very unlikely. Of course, aim here. When it comes around to the back of the tank, aim at this lower part of the armour. You'll see if we swap to the visual model, you can see it's this lower bit here underneath the turret. That's where you want to aim because that's the weakest. But of course you can always just hit the back of the turret because 140mm of effective armour means that pretty much every tank that you'll be playing against this thing in will be able to pen it. As far as some other tanks, of course we can go to the French ones. We'll now move on to the AMX M4 MLE. This one is another very similar heavy tank. You want to be looking at the lower plate here, 220 to 240mm of penetration, going to be fairly easy for you to actually pen. Then of course if the tank tries to side scrape, you can hit this kind of angled plate here. So if we look to the visual model, you'll see it. It's this plate here. This is where you want to be aiming if it tries to angle at all. So realistically, people who play the AMX M4 want to be wiggling side to side to avoid actually getting hit in the lower plate or this area here. So wiggling like this is going to basically mean that you're going to be able to have the best chance to avoid a shell. But of course, if they are angling this area here, or you can just go straight through the tracks and into the hull armour, trying to actually pen and track them. And of course, the side of the turret is paper, it's terrible, let's not beat around the bush. And of course you do have these big cupolas where if they are hold down using the gun depression of 8 degrees, you will not be able to hit the cupola, so don't actually try. I wouldn't recommend actually trying to get the cupola, but yeah, there we go. As far as the other weak points, of course the side armour is trash, 60mm. Of course if you've got high caliber guns then maybe you'll be able to actually pen it or auto pen it, but I very much doubt that unless you're in something like the FV 4005. And of course the back of the tank is absolutely garbage, 40mm, which means that yes, you can probably pen it with HE rounds. If we go to the live model, you'll be able to pen it in the back with HE rounds, so that's kind of my strategy for coming up against an AMX M4 MLE 54. Then we have the WZ-111 Model 5A. This is the Chinese Tier 10 heavy tank. The weak points of this, we're going to kind of rattle through them now. Just the lower plate. Of course, if it angles to the side, you can hit this upper plate, which becomes the area. And if it angles to the other side, you can hit this upper plate. So you want to aim at the pike nose of this tank. Very, very similar to another tank that we'll look at later on. And of course, we've got the WZ-111 5A's cupolas that you can try and hit if you're kind of duking it out. But of course, they can be moving the turret and it becomes a little bit more difficult. As far as if it over angles too much, you can actually pen it through the tracks and the side armor. So you can go through there. That's where you kind of want to aim at heavy tanks, to be honest. If you can lock down the tracks and actually deal damage at the same time, will mean that you're just going to basically be better off to get around behind them. Of course, if you get around behind them and you have higher penetration HE rounds, then yeah, you might want to be able to actually fire at the lower part of this tank. But if you've not really got that good pen, then you want to be aiming anywhere at the back of the tank will basically grant you. Don't aim at the side angled side bits. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't really recommend aiming at the side of this tank, but if you are, then where you do want to hit, if we go to the visual model, is in this kind of area between the tracks. Don't go aiming at this top bit because that's the most effective. And of course, if you want to try and hit the turret, and that's the only thing you can do, the further back on the turret you can hit, the better, because it gets stupidly high armor towards the front of it. And of course, the back of the turret is always a weak point. Next up, the Rinoceronte, the Tier 10 Italian heavy tank. The key weak points of this tank are, of course, the lower plate, like pretty much every single heavy tank in the game. You also have the upper plate, to be honest. If you're firing high penetration rounds, you'll basically be able to go through the upper plate as well. So if you're looking at Tier 10 premium rounds, then yes, the upper plate will probably be able to go through, especially if you are above it, it becomes paper. As far as dealing with this thing, if it gets hulled down, your kind of key areas that you want to be looking at are this kind of area up here, but very unlikely to actually hit it. And to be honest, I wouldn't really challenge this this tank if it got into a position like this, unless you've got a super high penetration Jaeger round or something where you can actually just go through the angled armor of the turret. And of course, yeah, just kind of take that note. If, however, you do get a very, very slim pixel and you get this kind of angle here, then maybe you want to go for that. But to be honest, I would rather just go for there. Or if they overexpose their hull armor, you can actually put one up into the bottom of the Rinoceronte. Of course, side armor is absolutely terrible in the Rinoceronte, and you want to be looking at basically this part here and any of the actual gun, but try and avoid the front bit and this area here. Try and aim for the actual bulky bit, and of course the side armor is pretty terrible as well, but it does have some trollish areas where you'll get stupidly high effective armor angles. So if you can, aim at the back and the top of the back of the tank here, in this area here, or alternatively straight through the tracks. Don't try and aim at this kind of bit that kind of goes in between. It's not going to end up very well for you. And if you do get the back of the tank, HE rounds do absolutely so nice against the back of the tank. Yeah, it doesn't really have much armor. 40mm, yeah, you'll pen it with pretty much every single tank in the game at Tier 8 and Tier 10 respectively. Yeah, basically you'll be able to do that. And the back of the turret, don't really aim for with that with HE, but if you do have standard ammunition, or you can basically pen it with every single tank that you'll meet it in. Then, of course, we have the Japanese heavy tank. This is the Type 5 Heavy. We'll have a look at what you need to do against this tank. It's quite an interesting armor layout, to be honest with you. Key areas that you actually want to be looking at with the Type 5 Heavy, where it's kind of the weakest, is the cupola on top here. If you can hit that, 230mm of penetration will basically ruin this tank's day. This kind of bar here is basically an area where you want to be looking as well. So this flat bit here, if you've got high penetration premium rounds, 270mm, basically that becomes the bane of the Type 5's existence. And of course the lower plate, if you've got yet again 275+ of penetration, you'll basically be able to go through it a lot more easier. As far as moving, if they angle, then you can hit this angled plate here, which becomes less angled as they try and wiggle and move. Then you want to be aiming there. Same on the other side. And then if you get the side of the tank, then you want to be aiming at this top bit, whereby you get this area here where it doesn't have any spaced armor on the side. So yeah, if you can do that, then that's the area you want to be looking at. And of course, if you can only see the turret, then you want to be aiming at the anywhere on the side of the turret. It doesn't really matter too much. If you can, this actual area up here is not an area that you want to be looking at. And then, of course, the cupola, if that is literally the only thing you can see. As far as the back of the tank, yes, basically anywhere in the back. Don't aim at the angled sides of the turret, as you'll see on the visual model. Aim at the flat bit, because that is the key to success in World of Tanks as far as penetration. And yeah, if you can fire HE, I wouldn't recommend it against a Type 5. Yeah, there we go. That is the Type 5 Heavy. Then it's the Tier 10 Polish heavy tank, the 60 TP. Where are your key points for actually winning fights against this thing? Well, it is the lower plate again, like the majority of Tier 10 heavies. Of course, if you are above it, then don't shoot down onto it. You want to shoot down onto the upper plate. But if it's trying to angle, or at least use its gun depression, then you want to be actually aiming at this bottom part. As far as the turret armor goes, it has got really nice armor for the most part. And so realistically, the area that you want to aim for, if you can only see the turret and you have to fight this thing, then yes, you want to be aiming at the cupola. Otherwise, if you do have a 153mm gun or higher, then you want to be able to actually go through the top of the tank, because you can actually overmatch it. Yeah, basically, if you get above it as well, aim at the top of the turret, because that is the weak point of the 60 TP. As far as cheek armor, then don't ever actually deal with it. And then sometimes you'll be able to actually fire at this top bit that's not very well angled, and if we go to the visual model, you can actually see it's this kind of flat bit here. It's kind of hard to outline, but you see that there's this like bulky area here that you can actually pen, but you don't want to hit the actual viewport because that's just spaced armor. So yeah, aim at the lower bit of this if you are going to actually deal with the 60 TP from the front. As far as the side armor, yeah, you want to be aiming at the top bit. Don't aim at the tracks, because you're more likely to bounce, and especially if you're loading heat rounds, you'll basically get absorbed by the tracks. Then, of course, you have the back of the turret. Don't aim at the front of it, aim at the back. That's where you want to be aiming at the 60 TP. And of course, if you can get the very back of the engine deck, basically the side of the engine deck, then 85mm of penetration will get you there. And then the back of the tank is trash. So yeah, anywhere at the back of it is going to lead to a penetration in any tank that you'll meet the 60 TP in. Then we have the Kranvagn. This is the Swedish Tier 10 heavy tank. If you want to deal with this thing, definitely don't go up against it if it's using its hull armor and it goes hold down, and especially if it's using its gun depression, because you're very unlikely to hit the cupolas of the thing, which is kind of the only turret weak point of the tank, which are these cupolas here on either side. You'll notice them in game. And yeah, that you basically, if you can't see those, don't bother. And even if you can, because it's an autoloader and it's going to be pumping tons of shots into you, then yeah, you're very unreliable to be able to go through the front. So if it is getting hold down, then definitely don't be dealing with it from the front. As far as if it isn't hold down and you can actually see the bottom of the turret or the bottom of the hull armor, then yes, the lower plate is the area for you to have a good game against the Kranvagn. And of course, if it's reloading, then you can just get round the side of it and out-traverse it. Use your speed if you have any, and just put rounds anywhere into the side of the tank. Even the turret side of the turret is so weak, so you'll be able to go through that very easily. Those are the key to success against the Kranvagn. Not really too many frontal weak points other than the lower plate, and of course those cupolas, which you're very unlikely to hit. And to be honest, if I was going one-on-one against a Kranvagn as if it was fully reloaded, then yeah, don't go aiming there. And then, of course, the back of the tank is absolutely paper. So yes, HE rounds will be able to go through the back of it, but you want to be aiming at the flat part. And of course, if you have only got the turret and you've got HE loaded, which is very situational, then yes, you want to be aiming at the very back of the turret, which is 20mm, and pretty much everything that comes up against it is going to be able to go through that. So there we go, that is the Kranvagn. Then it's the Super Conqueror lower plate. Aiming for that is the key to success. Of course, if you're above it, then yes, you can aim at the top of the hull armor. But yeah, most tanks will be able to go through the bottom lower plate of the Super Conqueror like the previous tanks within the line. And of course, if you can actually get a shot at the cupola, then yes, you can hit this bit at the lower bit. Don't try and aim at the actual kind of bar. It's actually this point on the top, and you can only really do it, to be honest, if you're above it. It's very, very difficult to actually get the right shot to be able to deal damage through the cupola, because you can just see it's an auto ricochet because of the kind of spacing of it. So you kind of have to be above it like this to be able to deal with it. As far as the actual turret armor, you've got tons of space, so it's very, very difficult to deal with the Super Conqueror. If you do, however, get any of the side of it like this and it tries to angle, then you can go through the front drive wheel and actually track and pen the tank. And of course, you can get these any bit of the side of the tank as well. As far as actually dealing with it from the side, then you want to be aiming at the top a bit of the tank. Don't aim at this bit here. Don't aim where the tracks are. You want to be aiming at the top bit. And of course, if you can get the side of the turret, then the back of the side of the turret is the area for you to actually go through. That's kind of where you want to be aiming, the central bit here. Don't aim towards the front because it just starts to get ridiculous. And of course, if you accidentally miss or RNG goes against you, you'll be hitting the spaced armor, which means you're very unlikely to go through it. And of course, if you get the back of the tank, HE is your friend against the back of the tank, at least the hull armor. And the back of the turret is where you want to be firing your standard rounds or premium rounds, at least if you've got premium rounds loaded, because you won't need it for the back of the turret. But yeah, there we go. That is the Super Conqueror. Then we have the T110E5, the American Tier 10 heavy tank. Of course, like all of the other American heavy tanks, the lower plate is your area that you want to be aiming. And of course, at the sides of the lower plate, these area here on the side of it and the lower bit. And of course, if you really can, then yeah, the front bit as well, but it can be wiggling and yeah, it can pull off some bounces. And of course, if it is hold down, then yes, the cupola is a weak point and a key weak point at that. You want to be aiming at the flattest bit. So if you're like that, then you want to be aiming at this point. If you're frontal, then you want to be aiming at the front point. And of course, if you're on this side, then you want to be aiming there. But to be honest, if you can get the hull armor, that's where you want to be aiming, like with every heavy tank, to be honest. And of course, if you want to make sure that you pen every single time, then you can aim for this upper bit of the tank to be able to definitely pen every single time. But there we go, that is the E5. Not too many interesting weak points. And of course, the back of the tank, yes, you can. If you fire HE at the back of the hull armor, then you can, but at the back of the turret, you don't want to fire HE. So there we go, that's the key to success against the T110E5. Then it's the Object 277, the Tier 10 Russian heavy tank. Then the lower plate is where you're wanting to go. Don't aim at the top upper plate, to be honest, at all, unless you're above it, at which point it becomes useless. Turret armor, basically don't mess around with it. You want to be aiming maybe at the cupola if that's the only choice you actually have in the game. If you can out-traverse it, then yes, I would recommend it. Side armor is very, very troll in places, and definitely you want to be aiming at this bit in between the tracks. As far as the turret armor, don't go aiming at the side of the turret, to be honest with you, because if it is moving and angling and doing all of this weird stuff, then yes, you can pull off quite a few bounces. But if it is your last resort, then yes, you can aim at the back of the turret if it's angling like this or not angling at all towards you. As far as the back of the tank, pretty trash, and yeah, you won't be probably able to pen it every single time with HE in some tanks, but yeah, if you are going to aim, then this lower bit here that's the flattest. As far as standard rounds, then yes, the back of the turret and the back of the tank are where you want to be aiming. IS-7 is exactly the same. Don't go aiming at the turret at all of this tank. You want to be aiming at this point at the lower plate of the tank, where it's non-angled whatsoever. And if you have got premium rounds, that's the kind of the area of the tank. If it angles like this, then the upper plate or on the side that is angling towards is where you want to be going, and equally on the other side. If you've got super high penetration rounds like Jaeger heat rounds, then the bit just to the side of the actual mantler of the tank, this area here in orange, is where you want to be aiming as well. Side of the armor, aim between the tracks, not actually at this kind of side bit, and probably don't want to be aiming at this top bit either. Don't really aim at the turret either. So yeah, if you have to fire at the side, then definitely aim between the tracks and this top bit of armor. Back of the tank, yeah, don't fire HE at the back of the IS-7 because you won't pen. There we go, that's kind of the areas you want to be aiming at. Of course, like every single heavy tank, the back of the turret and the back of the hull armor are where you want to be aiming. Object 705, lower plate of course, like in the other ones, 280mm of armour. If you're above it, obviously shoot down onto the top of the hull. If you've got the side, then you want to shoot in between the tracks. If you've got the side of the turret, then the further back the better. And of course, if you get to the rear, then anywhere on the back of the turret is absolutely fine, and the back of the hull, yeah, no real interesting weak points with this tank, but of course, yeah, the lower plate as usual. Then we have the IS-4 as usual, once again with the Russian Soviet tanks. Lower plate is your key, 230mm. You can go through the upper plate if you're angled above it, and of course if you really have no other choice then you can go for the cupola. Of course you want to be aiming at the central point from the front if it's angling towards you, and of course if it tries to angle then yes you can go through this kind of side bit here, or alternatively if it's fully on the side then you want to be aiming at this top bit here. Don't aim between this spaced armor bit, and if you do have to fire at it, make sure that you aim at this top bit of the side, and of course don't really aim at the turret either, to be honest with you, from the side. If you get around the back, then anywhere on the back is absolutely fine. Don't aim at the turret back because it is actually fairly strong and you can pull off bounces quite a lot in the IS-7 or IS-4 from the back of the turret, so yeah, aim at the hull armor if possible. And then the final tank in today's list is the ST2, the tier 10 Russian heavy tank. Once again, lower plate is your friend. Of course, you can pen it very, very easily, and obviously this bit in the center. If we go to the visual model, you want to be aiming at this kind of bit that's quite angled, or not angled whatsoever. If it does manage to hide the lower plate, that's your kind of key to success. And to be honest, if you really do want to pen this thing, and you've only got the turret, then this cupola is a weak point once again. 270mm however, so if you're in a tier 8 with premium rounds, then you're probably not going to go through the cupola of this tank, at least reliably. If it angles to the side, then yes, you can hit it through this bit here, and on the other side, then yes, you can. As far as the side armor, aim at the top of the side armor or in between the tracks. Don't aim like where the track armor ends and the kind of actual top of the hull armor starts. That's kind of where you'll bounce. And of course, if you get round behind it, then you know your traditional hull armor is the weakest point and the back of the turret is the stronger point. But if you can only see the back of the turret, then you want to be aiming it there. That is all of the tier 10 heavy tank weak points, at least from my point of view. So if you did enjoy the video, then hit the like button and also subscribe for some more content like this coming out on a semi-regular basis. Of course, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much to all of the channel members for supporting the channel a little bit extra, and I really do hope you check out some of the other content on screen right now. Other than that, goodbye.